What if I told you that one of the most important events in European history wasn't a battle or a treaty, but a dream? Well, today, we're digging into the story of how one man's vision completely rerouted him to a small Roman city, and in doing so, lit a spark that would basically define a continent. It's an incredible story of strategy, faith, and turning a total surprise into a huge advantage.
So, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the mysterious vision that kicked this whole thing off. Then, we're going to analyze why the destination city was just a stroke of strategic genius. After that, we'll actually meet the very first people who joined this new movement in Europe. And finally, we'll get into this fascinating, kind of surprising idea that suffering was actually a key part of its success. Let's jump in. All right, so how did this journey that shaped a continent even begin? Well, it wasn't with some big, detailed plan. Nope, it started with a closed door and a mysterious voice calling out in the middle of the night.
Okay, try to picture this. The Apostle Paul is trying to expand his mission further into Asia, but every time he tries, it's like every door is slammed shut. He's mysteriously blocked. Then, one night, he has this dream, a vision really, of a man from Macedonia just pleading with him, cross over and help us. And the book of Acts tells us this wasn't just a casual suggestion. This was a divine command to completely change direction. So the big thing to get here is that this mission to Europe, it was never part of the original plan. It was a total pivot, a complete course correction that was dictated by this vision. They were literally rerouted from where they thought they were supposed to go in Asia, sent across the Aegean Sea, and into a land that would become a brand new heartland for their message.
Okay, so if this was a divine rerouting, you've got to believe the destination was important. And it absolutely was. The vision didn't just point them to some random town. It sent them specifically to Philippi. So what was it about this city that made it the perfect launch pad for a new movement in Europe?
You have to remember, Paul was a brilliant strategist, and Philippi was, well, it was a strategic goldmine. The book of Acts even calls it a leading city of the district, and for very good reason. Think of it as a miniature Rome, plopped down in Macedonia, which made it the absolute perfect place to start. Now, what really gave Philippi its muscle was this special legal status it had, called Ius Italicum. This was like the highest honor a city outside of Italy could get, and it came with some incredible perks. It basically meant that, as far as the law was concerned, being in Philippi was the same as being on Italian soil itself. And this status came with some huge practical advantages. As you can see, its citizens got major tax breaks, but the really crucial part? They were granted full Roman citizenship just for being born there. Now, this wasn't just some fancy title. It meant real prestige, legal protection, and a whole lot of influence. Philippi was a hub of Roman power.
And then there's the geography of it all. Philippi sat right on the Via Egnatia, which was basically the Roman superhighway connecting the entire Eastern Empire all the way back to Rome. This meant any idea that took root in Philippi had an express lane to the rest of the known world. It was a massive intersection for travel, for trade, and for ideas.
This mix of cultures created this really powerful communication advantage. See, the official language of the government and law was Latin, but the language of the people, in the markets, in their homes, that was Greek. So this meant the new message could be shared in the common tongue that everyone understood, while its messengers were protected by the powerful laws of the Roman Empire. It was truly the best of both worlds.
So we've got the divine call, we've got the brilliant strategy, but a plan is just a plan until people get involved, right? So how did this mission actually start to grow? Let's meet the very first people to embrace this new faith in Europe.
The first European convert wasn't a Roman general or some famous philosopher. It was a businesswoman named Lydia, a very successful seller of this incredibly expensive purple cloth. She heard the message while she was praying by a river, and her heart was opened. She and her entire household became the very first foothold of this new faith on the entire continent.
It all started with just two. Not 200, not 2,000, the whole foundation of this trailblazing community, the very first of its kind in Europe, was built on the faith of just two very different households.
And wow, what a contrast they were. On one side, you have Lydia's household. They were wealthy, respected, a key financial supporter from the world of business. And on the other side, you've got the household of a Roman jailer, a blue-collar government worker, a guy of law and order, who only converted after he witnessed a miracle with his own eyes. These were the founding families. But that jailer's story, well, it brings up a really critical theme here. This growth did not come easy. And that leads us to our final point. This paradoxical idea that in Philippi, suffering and influence were actually two sides of the very same coin.
It seems the same divine guidance that led them to this perfect strategic city also prepared them for the intense opposition they were about to face. The persecution wasn't a sign that the plan had gone wrong. No, it was an expected, baked-in part of the mission. There's a verse from way earlier in Paul's journey that really puts all this into perspective, where it's foretold just how much he would have to suffer, and that reframes everything, doesn't it? The hardship he faced in Philippi wasn't some detour from the mission, it was a central, predicted part of it. And this is where you see the ultimate paradox. The absolute worst circumstances created the absolute best opportunities. Being thrown in jail unjustly wasn't the end of the mission, it was the method of the mission. It's the only reason Paul ever got to connect with that Roman jailer and his family. The prison literally became his pulpit.
And that leads us with one final question to think about. This story frames suffering not just as a roadblock to be avoided, but as a pathway to an influence you never would have had otherwise. And it kind of challenges us to look at our own lives and ask, what if the hardest things we're facing aren't just obstacles to get over, but are actually part of a much bigger, more meaningful story?